Lou Eisen, boxing writer and historian. I don't know why we had the picture of last week's guest up there, Murray Gregg. I apologize to our guest today. Um, but we will fix that before this actually gets to air after. Today we have a fantastic guest. He's one of the first, probably the first person, without a doubt, that I befriended at the International Boxing Hall of Fame. He was extremely kind, and his name is Clay Moyle. He's an internationally well-known, admired, and respected boxing writer, and he's written some magnificent boxing books. He wrote a book on the wonderful Billy Miskey, and that book got Billy Miskey into the International Boxing Hall of Fame. He also wrote a wonderful book on Tony Zale, the great Tony Zale, the Man of Steel, and my favorite book, and I was just I was in tears seeing this in the store, was on this man, the Canadian. It took an American to bring this man back to life, Sam Langford. And this is a great book, and it's boxing's greatest uncrowned champion. And that's what Sam Langford is known as, boxing's greatest uncrowned champion. And if not for the racism of the time, he would have been a world champion. And we are pleased as punch to welcome someone who's more familiar with Canada than most Canadians themselves, Mr. Clay Moyle.
Thanks, Lou. It's good to be here.
Oh, thank you. It's great to have you. I was thinking the other day if you were going to change your name from Cassius Clay Moyle to Muhammad Ali Moyle, but I guess you stuck. That's a solution.
Nah, okay. I've been using this one for long enough. I think I'll keep it.
It's a great name. I never liked my name because Lou rhymes with so many things. And all my first cousins have the same name because they're named after my grandfather. So what made you, what was the first thing that when you came across Langford the first time you thought, I got to do something on this guy? What grabbed you?
Yeah, that's, I really didn't know much about Sam for the longest time. I'd heard the name, but once I started reading materials about him and other fighters, I just came across a wealth of information about his fighting prowess, and he was such a character. I mean, the guy was a real character and had a great sense of humor. But yeah, it was all the accolades I was coming across from his counterparts, these other great fighters who were, just singing his praises. The more I read about him and learned about him, the more intrigued I became. And at some point I just was like, how come nobody's ever written a book about this guy? He's phenomenal. He was phenomenal. And it was obviously such a shame that so many people don't know how great he was as a boxer. So, I just decided that I'd always kind of wanted to write a book, and I thought I would pick him as my first subject, of course, not realizing what a big job I'd taken on, because, as you know, he had over 300 professional fights and a 24-year ring career. So there was a lot of ground to cover and a tremendous amount of research, but that's really why I selected him as a subject. I just became fascinated with him.
I love that you mentioned, because I wanted to bring it up, his sense of humor. You sent me a lot of your notes because I was asking you certain questions before, and there's so many fantastic. I mean, the book could have been 600 to 800 pages, as far as I'm concerned, and that it wouldn't have been enough, because there's so many fantastic stories about him and so many hysterically funny quotes that he said that made sense. For instance, you were telling me about when they touch gloves, like in
right.
What was that story again?
Well, there's one where, I mean, it sounded like it happened on more than one occasion where he went out. Traditionally, many boxers before the final round would touch gloves before the round commences, and Sam went out and he reached out to touch gloves with a fighter, and it was earlier in the fight, and the fighter got a very confused look on his face and said, "Sam, this is not the last round." And of course, Sam said, "Well, it is for you." and then knocked him out, of course, that round. But he had that kind of ability and talent. He was, you obviously know very much about Muhammad Ali as a result of your great friendship with Angelo Dundee. And, Muhammad became pretty famous for early in his career naming the round he was going to take a fighter out. Well, Sam was very similar in that regard, and essentially was doing that, what, 100 years earlier.
Hmm.
Not 100, but
Yeah, I mean, but long before. And
right.
there was also, you had great stories about how one writer called him yellow, and I think it was in England, and he positioned the fighter right above the writer and then just knocked him into his lap.
Oh, yeah, that was actually against Jim Flynn.
Right.
And it did occur in the States. It was and that was one of only two losses Sam incurred over a 4 or 5 year period where I think he was really at his peak. And Flynn had upset him in a match, and then went about bragging about it. And this writer was very uncomplimentary towards Sam uh, as the rematch approached, and of course it caused a lot of ire on the part of Sam. And when that fight occurred, as you said, at some point during the match, he maneuvered Flynn over towards where that sports writer, was sitting near ringside, got into a clinch, and directed some comments towards the sports writer to the effect that here I'm about to bring your champion to you. And Flynn didn't know who he was talking to, kind of glanced over, and next thing you knew, Sam knocked him out. And it was in the first round. So he
Wow.
basically decided he was going to bring a very quick ending to this fight. And again, he had the ability to do that when he wanted to. He he carried a lot of fighters.
Right.
He said he was never involved in a fix, throwing a fight, but he would carry a number of fighters. There was a great story in a 1920 match. A Memphis promoter had a good crowd that particular day, and he said that Sam came up to him before the fight and said, "I noticed you got a good crowd out here. What did you want me to do? Did you want me to take him out early? You want me to carry him a few rounds?" That particular promoter, wasn't in the business of operating that way, and said, "Sam, you just fight the way you normally fight." But honestly, that was how he fought in many cases.
Yeah.
He was trying to do the wishes of the promoter. So yeah, interesting. I saw another comment by Abe Hadel, the great fighter, who said that we'll never know how many fighters that Sam carried during his career.
Yeah, it's interesting. The only time I ever saw Ray Arcel get angry was when someone asked him. I understand that Sam Langford and Benny Leonard and other guys had fixed fights, and he said, "Not in the way you think so.
Right.
No one was, like as you just said, no one was planned to lose." But he said Sam Langford's skill was so supreme, even if a gun to their head, guys just wouldn't get in the ring with him.
Hmm.
So he had to promise, as you said, to carry them for 8 or 9 rounds. And he said the only mistake some of these fighters made was they broke the deal.
Right.
And you have
Right.
that story you told me about that one guy. It was in the papers you sent me. The guy who agreed, where Joe Woodman, his manager, said he'll go easy on you, he'll let it go. And then this guy started to take punches with him, and Woodman or Sam said deals off.
Right. Right. Yeah. Um,
And that
there's,
happened
there's
with Ketchel too, didn't it?
I'm sorry.
Didn't that happen with Ketchel as well? Because Ketchel was notorious for not living up to deals.
Yeah, I don't know that there was an agreement between the two men per se in that particular fight. I mean, the story is that that there was a much more longer, lucrative match out on the West Coast that would take place if Sam would agree to carry him in this particular fight. Now, I think what Sam came to realize in that short 6 round fight with Ketchel was that carrying Ketchel was not necessarily as easy as it was to carry some other man. He had a real he was very complimentary concerning Ketchel and his level of aggressiveness, and he found he had to work a lot harder to avoid uh, taking him out. So I mean,
Right.
because he had to, at some point he decided that he had to defend himself, and he had to become more aggressive than he himself had planned in order to survive that 6 round bout. But yeah, it was a real shame that it was. I think it was a matter of months later that Ketchel, of course, was assassinated, and that
Mhm.
that longer fight never came to fruition. It would have been very interesting to see what the results would have been from that bout. Most
especially
of those in many of those, the majority of those in attendance felt that Sam had carried Ketchel, but there were others who didn't see it that way, of course. And
well,
you know,
I read. I mean, I've seen where they said that's been listed as a win for Langford or as a draw, but exactly what you said, where people said that Langford won, and that the next fight was supposed to be a title fight, and
right,
then Ketchel got assassinated, and that there went Sam's chances. But also, Ketchel was good friends of Langford and with Jack Johnson. He wasn't. He was unlike a lot of the fighters back then. He was not bigoted or racist at all in any way.
right, yeah. Ketchel's honestly a guy that would be interesting to see someone take on a full length biography about as well. I mean, if you think about it, I think Nat Fleischer did a very short biography about him. But yeah, he would be a task taken on, much like Langford. That would be a lot of work, many years of effort to do a decent job of it. But that would be well worth the time for someone to do.
Yeah, it's interesting when I would read about Ketchel that he would go to whorehouses of Jack Johnson, and he was good friends with Sam, and it's fascinating that although there were a lot of racist fighters back then, you get guys like Terry McGovern, who was actually good friends of George Dixon and Joe Gans and other black fighters. There were exceptions to the rule back then.
Right. Yeah, there definitely were. Of course, the flip side of that was you had a number of white fighters that just flat out refused to fight
Right.
blacks, of course, and in the states there were many states at the time where bouts between mixed races was prohibited.
Right. And it just kills me that I remember at the Hall of Fame years ago when we were there that I was sitting in on a seminar and I said, how can anyone accept John L. Sullivan as the first gloved heavyweight champ? He should be the first gloved white heavyweight champ because Peter Jackson was the best heavyweight in the world at that time,
Right.
and Johnson wouldn't fight him. I mean, this is almost like revisionist history.
Right. Yeah, you remember, I think it was Bob Fitzsimmons, who ultimately did become a heavyweight champion, and he always referred to Peter Jackson as the granddaddy of them all.
Right, right. And we know Sullivan wouldn't fight the Canadian George Godfrey, and he wouldn't fight Jackson.
Right.
And then, ironically, when Jack Johnson, now, here's something I want to ask you. So, Jack Johnson, apparently, did he make this deal with the National Sporting Club in England to fight Langford if he beats Burns?
Yeah, I believe he did. I mean, the story is that Jack Johnson, of course, was chasing Tommy Burns all around the world in an effort to try to get a fight with him for the title. And when Burns moved on from England to Australia, Johnson was getting short on cash supposedly, and the National Sporting Club stepped in and made an agreement with him. They would fund his travel to Australia in exchange for this agreement that should he win the title, he returned to England for a first title offense against Sam Langford, who they already knew very well because Sam had been there uh, a year prior and had 4 matches over there, and they were very impressed with Sam Langford. So they wanted to have the 2-man fight before their club in England. And yeah, there was a signed agreement. And after Johnson won the title, he reneged on the deal, and he felt like the money wasn't sufficient, refused to honor it. And he claimed that it was his manager that had signed the agreement. The National Sporting Club then produced the agreement with Johnson's signature, but no matter. Johnson, of course, moved back to the United States in pursuit of more lucrative opportunities. And then as a result, the National Sporting Club invited Sam to come over and instead fight for what they termed the world heavyweight title in England against their champion, Iron Hag. And Sam, of course, defeated him in the 4th round, knocked him out. And they in fact proclaimed Sam as the heavyweight champion of the world at the time. But yeah, long story short, I believe that Johnson signed that agreement to fight him and reneged on it.
But Johnson was known for that. I mean, a lot of people don't realize Johnson was, as Joe Frazier would say, was a scambuga, a rogue. he skipped out on hotel bills. He would get money for a vaudeville tour and do 3 nights and then leave. And from when I read about him in the book, Unforgivable Blackness, they said that he was his own worst enemy. I mean, people didn't want to help him. People were saying to Johnson, "Yeah, I would have helped you with that, but I signed you for 30 grand, and you did 4 shows and left, and you never
Right.
repaid me the extra money. So why would I help you?"
Yeah, Sam was a much more likable figure than Johnson for sure. I know that the famous promoter over in Australia at the time, um, Hugh
McIntosh.
McIntosh, specifically mentioned that he said that he was always at odds with Johnson, but instead got along, famously with Sam. Found him very humorous with a droll, whimsical sense of humor, and very very easy to work with. But yeah, Johnson, I think Johnson clearly ruffled a lot of feathers. And in fairness to him, uh, like all blacks at the time, he suffered a tremendous amount of discrimination. So I think he carried a big chip on his shoulder as a result of that. And
Yeah, and you can't blame him for that because
no,
I mean, that went up right. You look at a guy like Sonny Liston, who the mobster Mo Dalitz used the N word with him every time he spoke to him. And when Liston wanted to hurt him, he just said, "I'm a mobster. You hurt me, I'd kill you and your wife. Nothing you can do about it." And just
right,
it's heartbreaking when you see how Johnson and Langford and Gans and Dixon and all the great African American, African great Canadian, and African Australian fighters and British fighters were treated like dirt. It's unconscionable. It's evil.
right.
you know. So that's just the wind opening my door. So it's unbelievable that, and still, what upsets me, Clay, is that there are people here on this planet today that'll say, "Well, that's the way it was back then." Doesn't make it acceptable.
No, absolutely not. No,
Racism is
it's
wrong.
terrible.
Yeah, it's just terrible. And one of the stories I love that you had about uh, Sam Langford. I mean, there were so many, you know, uh, in the book. But it was great the way you spoke about his family, about his and the wonderful pictures of his extended family and his daughter. And in fact, you also mentioned that probably most people didn't realize and still don't that Jack Johnson drew the color line against Langford because he beat him the first time, but he could see how good he was going to become.
Yeah, he absolutely did draw the color line when it came to Sam and many of the other leading black contenders like Joe Jeanette and Sam McVeigh. He defeated all three of these fellows before, but clearly for a number of years they were the leading contenders for his title and didn't receive a shot. I think Sam more so than any of the others was robbed of that opportunity. I was looking through the notes in preparation for this as a reminder to myself of this call again, and I just recalled and remembered it was reminded that he was Sam at one time or another was the heavyweight champion of the world in 5 different countries: England, France, Australia, Canada, and finally Mexico. In addition to winning the colored heavyweight championship a number of different times. I think, the bottom line, Lewis, again, I was looking at notes and I was reminded that, the Australian promoter McIntosh tried very hard to get Johnson to come over and fight Sam. And, he said that finally at one point, Johnson just said to him, "Hey, you give it up. We're never going to fight." He is probably, just the most dangerous. He's got a chance to win against any heavyweight in the world. Basically there's too many other easy money white men for me to fight than risk the title against him.
Right. And that's the way
You know,
boxing is.
yeah. And he said the same thing to Duke Mullins, who was the trainer over in Australia, who trained both himself for his fight with Burns and then
Mhm.
later trained Sam when he was over there for a year and a half. He
Right.
said that anytime that Sam's name would come up, Johnson very quickly tried to change the subject and, said the same thing to Mullins. Basically, he's got a chance to win against anybody, and he didn't exclude himself. Not to say that Johnson might not have beaten him anyway, because he was a very skilled and bigger defensive fighter. I think he would have fought a very cautious fight against Sam, tried to avoid taking a big blow, but he knew Sam was the most dangerous fighter out there for him during that period of time. Didn't want to mess with him.
Right. And I in your book, you were mentioning how often, like Joe Woodman, Langford's manager, who really loved him, often the story of the fight was dependent on which manager got to the telephone quickest to call the newspaper. And Woodman said years later that, in fact, Sam was really beaten
Right.
in by Johnson, although he put out an alternative story.
Yeah, the only time they fought obviously was in April of 1906, and Sam, that was his second heavyweight fight in his career at that particular point in time, or third rather. I'm sorry, he had just defeated Joe Jeanette after they had fought twice. So yeah, Johnson, by all reports, won the fight easily, but he gained a healthy respect for Sam and his power. And in fact, in the 1940s, he referred to Sam as the toughest little son of a bitch that ever lived. So he didn't want to fight him again. I think that's the bottom line. I mean, and again, being a businessman, he was correct. I mean, he could make just as much money or more fighting easier white man than he could taking on Sam at that particular point in time.
Right. Angelo Dundee used to tell me that the rule of thumb was always the least amount of risks for the most amount of money.
Right.
And doesn't make for great fights all the time. But Langford didn't like Johnson, did he? I mean,
No, he didn't like him at all. I think he viewed him as just a braggart, and of course he was very angry at him for not giving him an opportunity.
right.
There was a great story about there was a benefit that took place shortly after the San Francisco earthquake, and Sam was asked to appear in this benefit to raise money for the San Franciscans, and according to this reports, he agreed, but on one condition. He wanted to be matched in this exhibition with Jack Johnson. Jack Johnson was appearing, of course, and in that, I guess Johnson, when he was introduced, he was awarded with some kind of a watch, and he was very full of himself. Sam was just disgusted with him, and he just did not like his manners. And when that exhibition took place, this is Sam's report of the story, that what view of what took place. He said he walked up to Johnson and said this wasn't going to be any exhibition, and that they proceeded to brawl and knock down some background scenery, and he really played it up in terms of what took place. Now, I searched and searched to see if I could find any reports that would back that up, but I did not come across anything of that sort. So I don't know if anything to that degree took place. But yeah, clearly Sam didn't like the man, but he was complimentary in terms of his skills later on.
Right.
He had a respect for Johnson's ability as a fighter.
Yeah, that came out. I don't like him personally, but he could really fight.
Right.
And it just shows you that you were talking about a potential fight between them. I mean, Angela always said to me, "There's no ifs in boxing. Don't go on these Facebook pages. What happens if Jack Johnson faces Joe Frazier?" He said, "It's a stupid question.
Right.
Two different eras, two kinds of fighting, and there's no answer. You can only go by if they actually fought." So
yeah, and I was thinking about that today, Lou. Like you say, you go on the internet, you see all these debates between these so-called historians and other fans about what would happen if these certain fighters fought one another. I've always put much more weight on the opinion of men who fought in the ring against these men at that particular point in time. Like, Joe Jeanette, for example. Joe Jeanette fought both Sam and Jack Johnson. He fought Jack Johnson on more than one occasion prior to Johnson becoming the champion. And, Jeanette felt that once Sam got a little more ring experience and gained some weight, that he felt that Sam would have defeated Johnson anytime that Johnson gave him a fight, gave him an opportunity. That's.
Yeah, you have to trust what he says. Yeah, absolutely.
Right. Yeah, and Gunboat Smith fought both men. He fought Jack Johnson. He sparred with him, and he fought Sam twice. He felt that Sam would defeat him as well. And he also said, I think he said that Gunboat Smith fought both Dempsey and Jack Johnson in addition to Sam. And he said that Sam was the harder hitter of the three by far. He
Wow.
said basically that Sam ruined him the last time that the two fought. He
Sam
was never
ruined a
the
lot
same.
of guys.
Yeah, I think he did.
A lot of guys were never the same in or out of the ring after they fought Sam. It's interesting you say that because I use your name online a lot when people bring Langford up, and I always say you should read Clay's book. But I also say if that's not in Clay's book, then I don't buy it. If Clay didn't say that, then you can't tell me that he fought this guy or that guy if there's no record of it. If Clay doesn't have it, it doesn't exist.
Yeah.
So,
Well, Lou, you mentioned earlier about the book potentially being longer. There was a period that my first draft of that book was over 150,000 words,
wow,
and I ultimately edited it down to about 113,000 after I learned from different publishers that they considered the sweet spot between 80,000 to 110,000.
right.
There's so many more books about boxers that we see today that are self-published or through smaller publishers that are 500 or 600 or more pages. You couldn't get away with that back in the day when you could only get a book published by a mainstream publisher. No one was going to publish something that long.
Well, when I sent my book, I had problems with Amazon. So Colleen Acock, who we both know, send it to my friend at
Right.
Harlan, and he said I like it, and I said thank you, but he said you've written like 4 books. He said it's 223,000 pages. He said he's very polite. He said, with all due respect and politeness, are you out of your mind? He said 100,000 is the most, and he said I like what you've written, but he said in your pages you'll mention, for instance, the Wolgast Rivers fight, and you mention how Jack Welch cheated. And I'll say, right. He said, but you mentioned it 9 times. It isn't necessary. You mention it once, that's it. Take the other 9 out. And I went, that's a good point. But he gave me such great direction that I knew what to look for when going through it and cutting off.
Well, Nat Fleischer was so prolific when it came to writing books. I mean, he knocked out so many of them. But what a lot of people don't know is that in early 1960s or mid 60s, there was an article in Sports Illustrated about all these unpublished manuscripts that he had in his vault in his office at Madison Square Garden, and he referred to those. And miraculously, I came to acquire those in around 2013,
That's
and
incredible.
there was like, for example, a work that was unpublished by him, the history of prize fighting in New York, and another one about Chicago, and those were just massive. I mean, they were typewritten pages, 500 or 600 pages. I don't know. They would have been well over, like you said, today you'd have to do 3 or 4 books to get them published. So he could not find, as well known as he was and as respected as he was as a writer in his time period, he could not find anybody to publish them. So they sat in this safe forever. I ended up selling those to the University of Notre Dame, but so they're well cared for now. But yeah, I was
They
blown
were well
away
cared,
by.
they were well cared for when you had them because no one,
Well,
no
I
one,
think they'll be cared for better there than
yeah, but no
here.
one respected it more and loved it more than you did, and knew about it and knew and appreciated what he was doing more than you did.
I don't know where the man found the time to
Right.
write so many material on sitting on an old typewriter too.
Yeah.
He
Oh
must not
yeah.
have slept.
No, I mean, and then you read about him, and he'll talk about the George Dixon fight with young Griffo, and I'm thinking, well, what were you 4 months old during that fight? I mean, how could you cover that fight, in the 1890s, and then
Right.
be
But he obviously acquired and accumulated a lot of material, like from like the old National Police Gazette, the Mirror of
Mhm.
Life. So I mean, he had a tremendous supply of recounts of those fights, but he was obviously relying upon that information to do that.
Wasn't Ring originally the idea of Tex Rickard as an in-house magazine for his promotional company?
I don't know. I don't know how that originated. Of course, all I know is that the first issue was in February of 1922, of course. But
Mhm.
you think about that as well. Shoot, what is the spacing out here? The name of the periodical that began in 1910 in
The Arena?
England.
The
What
Arena?
is it?
Was it The Arena?
No, no. It's got boxing in the name of the title.
Okay.
In any case, I mean, yeah, basically they were 12 years before. So, I mean, there are some great periodicals out there that exist to this day, back to 1910, and obviously well beyond that. And some of the older, like the Illustrated Record, there was a periodical titled The Illustrated Record. I came across some of those from like 1901 to 1904 and so forth. They were so brittle that you had to handle them very carefully because they disintegrate in your hands. But so many tremendous articles and huge line drawings of fighters and fights that were taking place. I mean, they were fantastic. Big too. I mean, you're talking about 11 by 14 and, you know, big,
Wow.
massive volumes of these periodicals.
I know that I was trying to. I have it in the first chapter in my book. Tony G helped me with it, the bare knuckle boxing historian. I was looking for the first fight that I could verify was fixed in England. I think it goes back to 1772. So I was looking online and typing these things into Google, and it mentioned that there was this newspaper. I don't know if it was the Eris Birmingham Gazette or something, but it had been publishing boxing stories from 1700 to 2000. And I had a guy's name, so I contacted the guy. He said, "Yeah, they just stopped." And I said, "How do I get a hold of these fights?" And he said, "It's all online." And he gave me the information. I went online. I was able to find it and look about this fight. But when I spoke to Tony G, he said the problem with Pierce Egan, and it wasn't anything negative about Pierce Egan, but reports from that time weren't necessarily correct as to the dates often, and a lot of the reports were done well after the fight had taken place. So,
You
uh,
know what? So I dug through a lot of microfilm, obviously, to do research for the Langford book and others. But one thing I did not uh, do was, and I would have liked to have gotten my hands on a lot more of the accounts in African American newspapers of that time. And I've never really come across many of those. I don't know how difficult that is. I assume it's probably pretty difficult. Maybe not so much in the last couple of years. I'd like to think that they're available now in microfilm or in
mhm.
some other manner, but I wonder how many of those have actually survived and exist. But I would love to read accounts of fights, like the Johnson Langford fight in 1906 in Boston. I dug up a number of local paper accounts of the fight, but I'm sure there were accounts in some black newspapers of the time too. But I wasn't able to find any of those. It would have been very interesting to read those.
I know in reading recent baseball books, there are uh, quotes from black owned newspapers from the 40s and 30s and 20s. So, I mean, it exists. I just don't know how to go about finding it.
Right.
So it's difficult. You're luckier in the sense that you're in the States. When I called to try to access Hank Kaplan's boxing archive at Brooklyn College, the woman said, "We'll get you anything you want. You just have to be here in person."
Right.
She said it's too massive to put online. It just
Yeah.
isn't possible. So that's sort of um, a detriment. It's interesting with Langford because I read about him when I was a kid, and my father would talk about him. And when I spoke to Angelo, I don't know if Angelo met him. I know Chris knew him. Chris Dundee's brother knew
Yep.
Langford well, and he said Sam was always a gentleman,
Right.
always had a smile and a funny joke for you. And there's that clip online which you've seen where he just has the eye surgery,
Yep.
and it's like a 35-second clip, but he had a smile that even today when you look at it in your book, he
Oh, yeah, it's a
lights
great laugh.
great laugh, and that smile lights up the world. And just such a a magnificent person, you wonder why. I mean, your book should be a movie. I mean, I can't think of a better topic for a movie.
Well, Lou, I can tell you that there was a fellow that optioned the book, shoot, 8, 9 years ago. I've become good friends with him now over the years, and helped him with the outline, and give him some input. He's actually written a screenplay for it, and then during COVID, we worked together on a pilot for a possible series. So he's got a pilot written and outlined for episodes. So he's been peddling this for the last 6 or 7 years, I'd say, in an effort to try to get somebody interested in funding that project. And he's been talking to a number of pretty well known parties. But yeah, so far it hasn't transpired. I think it would make for a very interesting movie, and the screenplay that was developed, I think, is very good. But yeah, who knows? Both my parents were alive when my first two books were optioned, and I thought, well, geez, this would really be something if
Right.
one of these gets made into a movie. I'd love it for my parents would love this, and now I'm just hoping that if it actually happens, I'm still here.
Right. I spoke a friend of mine who's been a movie reviewer from Toronto, but he wrote for the LA Times and the Hollywood Reporter and Newsweek and different things. And I said to him, "How do you?" And became a screenwriter himself. But I said, "How do you get stuff optioned? You write something, and it's good. It's not you whether you think it's good or not, but other people have seen it and said that's great. It should be a movie." He said it's easier if you get a star attached. And
Yeah.
he said that's why so many actors are aspiring writers, because when they do a movie with someone, you mention, hey, I have something you might be interested in. He said if you get someone behind it, and I've been trying to do the same thing with Jim Dundee about his father and their
Yep.
relationship with Muhammad Ali vis-a-vis the Nation of Islam and the mafia, and just book, movie, documentary, and everyone's like, why?
Yeah, I know. I personally, obviously familiar with that effort, and I think that story would be very
Right.
interesting and quite a bit different, obviously, than all of the other Ollie movies and stories we've seen and heard. So, yeah, I wish him luck with that, and you, if you're going to be continuing involved with it, because I think it would be, I think it would do well.
Well, I do too, but it's interesting. A friend of mine from grade school is an entertainment lawyer, and he said to me, sat down with me, he said, well, there's good news and bad news. And I said, what's the good news? There's only two literary agents in Canada that handle sports projects. That's it. And I
Well,
said,
you know what, Lou? There's something else I heard about Canada from the fellow who has the option on the Langford, and that's if we thought at one point well, maybe we'd have a better chance of getting in some interest in Canada for this story, since Sam was born in Nova Scotia,
"Mhm,
and come to learn that to obtain funding for an effort like that in Canada, it has to be. I believe he said it had to be directed and produced by or written by a Canadian party, something to that effect. Anyway, there was some obstacles that made it more difficult to accomplish that in Canada than I thought it necessarily would be
yeah, yeah, I've gone through the same thing.
in the States.
Oh, no, in Canada,
Oh,
where they said, yeah, we'll give you, like I said, my next book, I want it to be, we were talking about this off there, because it's a great theme on George Godfrey and George Budge Byers, because their stories were a success. Byers retired, or Godfrey retired wealthy, and then his family turned it into millions on his advice. He said, don't
mm,
sell the land, rent off of it, but keep it. And so they made millions. And he saved his money and he worked for the railroad. And his family, both families still have the money. It's a success story. Two African Americans whose families started in slavery, who came from Prince Edward Island, but at the time they were born, the population of African Canadians there was infinitesimal. It is today, so it was less then.
right.
And once again, take it to a producer here. That's a great story. I know who to do it. And it gives me the name of a guy who just produced a documentary on Canadian TV on Buck O'Neill, the black baseball player,
Yep.
and Herb Carnegie, the first well-known black hockey player in Canada. And I spoke to the guy. He said, I loved it. I loved it. And I said, that's great. He said, but I work for the sports network here, and what I do is I help companies to bring us documentaries. So you have to go to the guy that brought that to me. I went, great, and sent him an email 4 weeks ago, and nothing. Because in Canada, unlike the States, they just don't get back to you.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, things move at a snail's pace, seemingly.
Yeah.
There's been so many times over the years here that again, the fellow who has the option on this Langford book has contacted me and told me about someone's, such and such a party that it's been presented to. The read it over, and an actor, and fairly big names at times, and you get your hopes up that okay, now we're finally getting somewhere, maybe, but nothing's come to fruition yet. So yeah, we'll see.
It's frustrating. It almost gives you a sense, I don't know if it's fair to say, of Langford and what he went through in his time, because he must have been told a million times, you're going to get your shot.
Right.
This time it's
Yeah.
happening. And then it just never happened.
Yeah, I think that when he honestly felt that it was over for good, that that was never going to happen, was clearly when Jess Willard, uh, the white contender, defeated Jack Johnson in 1915. At that point, he says he flat out decided that that was it. There was no way that a black man was going to get a chance to fight for the title again anytime soon, and that he quit any serious training. And he was right, honestly, because it wasn't until 1937, right, that Joe Louis became the first man to get a chance to fight for the title. Yeah,
Jack Johnson was lucky he wasn't killed by Jack Blackburn. Blackburn, who trained Lewis, hated Jack Johnson, and
right.
Blackburn had killed a person before, and he had a terrible temper. And as a lightweight, I mean, as you know, the weight divisions weren't enforced, so he'd fight heavyweights.
Yeah, I always thought Blackburn would make a great subject for a book as well. No
He
one's written
would,
a book about him.
yeah, that's right. And there's snippets of information about him, but he was the story about him was he was in a Jack Johnson called him. He was in prison in Philly, and he said, "I need $3,000 to get out to pay the bail." And Blackburn paid it, and that was his payroll after 10, 12, 15 years of fighting. That was his savings.
That's a lot of money back then.
Yeah, and when Blackburn was in prison, 3, 4 years later, he asked Johnson, and Johnson said no. Said, but I gave you my life savings. Well, you're an idiot then. I didn't force you to. I just asked you.
Yeah.
And Blackburn, the smoke was coming out of his ears. So there was a story. You've probably heard this when Lewis was training, and I don't know if it was for Schmeling, but it was the Pompton Lakes, and Johnson came up to the camp, and he was telling him, Blackburn's a loser, and he can't do this, and you didn't realize Blackburn was like a father to Lewis, and
Right.
and all of a sudden, you heard the unmistakable click of a trigger being pulled, and he turned. He was about to turn, and Blackburn just said, "It's me. Leave or die." And Lewis said he had no doubt that Blackburn would have blown his head off.
Well, I've never heard that story, but of course, we know that Blackburn did go to prison for murder. So he
Right.
was certainly capable.
Right. And, when they first brought Lewis to him, he wasn't going to take him because he said they'll never give another black guy a chance after what Jack Johnson.
Yeah, right. And it was a valid concern at the time, obviously.
Yeah. And he said to him, Blackburn said, I didn't really care about what he did sexually or with his wives. My argument was the way he screwed people over financially.
Mm-hmm.
And because of that, promoters weren't going to allow us to get a chance again, ever,
Right.
because of him. And so there was a lot of enmity amongst him and I know Johnson got along with McVeigh. There's a story, I don't know if it's I think it's in your book, where Sam hands a key to Sam McVeigh, and it was for the ugliest fighter. What was that about?
Yeah, I can't remember, I haven't gone back and revisited that for so long, but yeah, basically it was that there was a key that somebody started this tradition of passing the ugliest man that they'd met. And Sam got that key. And when he got to, I think it was France where he met McVeigh for the first time. And he
Mhm.
turned to his friend and said, "Hey, where's that key? He's finally found some guy to gift pass it to." He thought McVeigh was the ugliest man they'd ever seen.
A lot of people said that about McVeigh. I don't think it was fair, but it's funny,
No, yeah,
you
it
know.
was funny.
And McVeigh was in the corner of Johnson when he fought Jeffries. You,
Yeah, I think actually McVeigh and Johnson developed a friendlier relationship, obviously, than Johnson did with either Joe Jeanette or Sam Langford.
right.
Uh, yeah, I don't know why, but those two seem to hit it off to some degree.
What the interesting thing in reading about uh, Sam is that he was trained by George Budge Byers, and
Yeah, I almost brought that up when you raised the name of Byers.
yeah,
Yeah, Langford credits George Byers, who was, I believe, was the lightweight. With
right,
at one point, Byers told him
middleweight, middleweight.
he needed to learn how to hit, with power. And Byers, he credits Byers with teaching him how to set on his punches and get his body into it. And so, yeah, I guess it sounds like. And Gans, when he fought Gans and defeated him in a big surprise in 1903, uh, Gans met with Sam and showed him a few things as well. But I think more than anybody, he credits Byers with showing him how to hit with power.
Well, the story I read was that they're at a bar after, and
Gans,
Boxer was full of himself, and and uh, and Byers said, "Why are you so full of yourself?" And he said, "Well, I beat Joe Gans." He said, "You didn't really beat him." He said, "You won the fight because he fought a 20-round fight last week
right?
and he's exhausted. You didn't, if he'd been rested, you wouldn't have had a chance." Yeah, but I hit him and I hit you. Did you know what you were doing in there? What do you mean?
Well, if you think about it, Sam had only when he fought Gans for that title, Sam had only been a professional for a year or a little over a year because he didn't turn professional himself until 1902. So yeah, he was very raw at the time he fought. So it was a very big surprise that he beat Gans on that particular occasion. But like you say, Gans, supposedly the story is that he had a long fight and a long train ride, and supposedly they were playing cards. And yeah, I don't think he had much concern or worry over having to face Langford at the time, this young man. But yeah, they obviously never fought again either. Um,
No, it's interesting because Gans, as you said, and Byers were teaching him things in the bar.
right.
But what really struck me, Clay, was the fact that Langford didn't say, "Oh, forget it. You just won't give me credit." He actually went, "Oh, okay. I understand. You're right." I mean, he was willing to accept it and learn.
Yeah, he clearly was. He was thankful for the input and advice that he received and acted upon it.
The most touching thing I read in your book that brought me to tears was when I think it was in England where he stepped off the curb when a white man was walking towards him. He,
Right.
he was so used to what was the story of that?
Yeah, the story was when he arrived in England in 1907. This couple of sports writers were sent to the boat to meet him and bring him over to the club. And when they were walking along, Sam was drawing a lot of attention because he had some really loud checkered suit outfit on. But when he would see men approaching from the opposite direction, white men approaching from the opposite direction, the sports writers noticed that he immediately stepped off the curb out into the street until they passed him. And he did that a couple times, and they asked him what he was doing. And they told him, "You don't have to do that." And he was very surprised because, well, he said, "Well, back where I come from, we're not allowed to walk with white folk." So yeah, what a commentary, huh?
Yeah, that just I mean it chokes me up today.
Right.
To do that to another human being,
Well,
especially
even 4 years later, he was when he went over there to fight. I think it was Bill Lang, if I'm not mistaken. The National Sporting Club invited him to attend a dinner with the press, where they're just, trying to drum up press for the upcoming fight. And Sam declined the invitation. He just basically said that he wouldn't be comfortable there as the only black party amongst all those white folk, and that he said he knew his place. So
yeah.
and that was the same fight, of course, that there were many the majority of the crowd were rooting for Lang, the white man, and they brought out the white gloves. They didn't have black gloves for the fight. They
I
put
was not
they
picking
fitted
it
the
up.
fighters with white gloves, and the idea was that the white gloves were going to show up more effectively against the black skin.
Yeah, that's on the cover of the book.
Right, that's the
Yeah,
fight.
yeah. Wow.
Yep, remarkable fighter.
And you also had that great story in the book that made me smile. Makes you want to shout out in happiness. The one where they said, "We appoint the referee."
Oh yeah, when he first went to the National Sporting Club in 1907, they were talking about the fight, and they were going to need to select a referee, and Sam said, "Oh, I brought my own referee," and of course they were incredulous. What do you mean you brought your own referee? That's not allowed. And then Sam said, held his right fist and said, "Well, here it is, right here. This is my referee, the one that gives the right decision every time."
How can you not love a man like that? I mean,
Yeah,
really,
no, man. He had a great sense of humor, very witty. I mean, he was a sports writer's dream in terms of interviews. Very quotable.
and a very bright man. I mean, a very smart man, and it just someone should have looked after him when the career was over, rather than let him drift. I mean, when he retired, what
Right.
happened with his wife and his daughter? I mean, he did he divorce his wife or did she divorce him?
She divorced him. I don't know exactly what was going on with them. I know one reason, of course, was that he kept fighting long after she wanted him to quit, and in fact, went blind in one eye, and
Mhm.
and he started drinking quite a bit towards the end of his boxing career. She sometimes traveled to Australia or England or France, gone for months and months at a time. Um, they just, I guess, they drifted apart, and yeah, she divorced him, and but later in life, when his great granddaughter remembers Sam coming over to her mother's house, his granddaughter, or his daughter's house, and Sam would come for a visit. It'd be a big to do. Everybody who knew who Sam Langford was in that neighborhood, and his wife would be there. They were cordial to each other, and she had many great memories of their times together and the year and a half they spent as a family together over in Australia. So, so they had a little bit of a reconnection at some point, but they never again lived together. Of course, he ended his life in a private nursing home. About six other patients in a house or so forth, and um, but he stayed in touch with his family, and there was that relationship still.
And Dempsey admitted that the only fighter he was afraid of was Sam Langford.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, I mean, you get of course, the Dempsey fans don't want to hear that today and say, he was just being kind and so forth. But again, Gunboat Smith, who fought both of them, said Sam would have defeated him easily. And I think, Dempsey, when he had an opportunity to fight him, he was 21 years old. And yeah, he said he was the only man he ever really feared was Sam Langford because he knew he would flatten him.
Yeah, and this was John the Barber Riesling. Didn't care about him as erstwhile manager at
Right.
that time in New York. And
Yeah.
said,
And at
"Oh,
that particular time, I'm sure he probably would have flattened him because,
yeah,
Dempsey was not that experienced as he became later, of course. And, but what the same thing is, Sam was Sam was blind in one eye at the time though too, but he was still very dangerous. What's really remarkable to me, Lou, is the fact that guys like Sam Langford and Harry Greb, possibly the two greatest fighters in history, both had over 300 professional fights recorded, and both fought the last third of those blind in one eye.
unbelievable."
It's remarkable.
Yeah, it's more than remarkable. It's unfathomable. I mean, two eyes,
Right.
still a dangerous sport, even if you're all-time elite like they were. But one eye, I mean, your balance is off. You can't see shots coming.
Well, and of course, in the end, when Sam won that heavyweight title in Mexico, you know, at the end of his career, he could hardly see out the other eye. They
Yeah,
were, and his handlers were concerned for him because he couldn't see anything, and they said, yeah, he said, don't worry, you don't have to worry about old Sammy. I don't need to see him. I just got to feel him. So he'd get out there barely able to see, and he'd somehow managed to get him maneuvered into a corner where he could feel him, deliver an uppercut, and knock the guy out and win the heavyweight championship of Mexico.
One of the last arguments I ever got into. That's a wonderful story. Someone mentioned how they thought Fred Fulton was a better fighter than Langford, which I thought was hysterical. Well, he said he knocked Langford out, but Langford was legally blind.
Well, and Fulton's the one who actually blinded him permanently in the one eye because Sam suffered a detached retina in that fight. Yeah, and Fulton obviously was a very large 6'4". I don't know how much he weighed at the time, well over 200 pounds. And you got this 5',
Six, yeah.
6, 7 inch fighter, overweight, out of condition. He was getting towards the latter part of his career. And that was at a time when Willard won the title and he wasn't training seriously anymore. But, when he was motivated, he remained dangerous. I mean, in 1922, he defeated, knocked out Tiger Flowers,
Mhm.
who would go on to become the middleweight champion of the world. That's 5 years after he lost the sight in his left eye, and was only a few years away from the end of his career. He was still good. He was still good enough to get this guy in a position where he could deliver the knockout blow. He had knockout power with both hands.
Was the sight fully restored in both eyes after the surgery?
Yeah, briefly. I guess that, in the late 20s, he had that surgery where he was briefly able to see out of both eyes again, but it didn't last very long at all.
That's sad.
Yeah. Yeah. He reached, in the late 20s and 30s. I mean, he was really getting by mostly from handouts. He would get paid here and there to, in a bar to tell his old stories. And then in the summer, well, he would go up to the eastern provinces, Canada, and perform in tent shows with parties like Joe Walcott and put on these boxing exhibitions, again, where he's basically can't see, very fat and out of shape, but he'd make some money during the summers in that manner.
Wow. It'd be great if there were articles around or photos around from that era.
Well, I've seen some, not very many, but I remember seeing one particular picture of him in the ring. Of course, I have one with him standing in a ring with Joe Walcott, where
Seen that, yeah.
both overweight, of course. But yeah, I'm sure there's a few articles. But you probably have to, if you dug around to some of the newspapers of those days in microfilm, if that's an option for you in Canada, I would imagine you could come across them. Be a lot of work.
Yes, I mean I know that the Toronto Reference Library has the newspapers here going back a long time, so I
Right.
I, I was able to find things when I was researching George Budge Byers and George Godfrey. The local Prince Edward Island newspapers were publishing stuff on the Crimean War. So, I mean, that's how far it went back.
Yeah.
Some newspapers around the country, like in Toronto, for instance, um, they would print boxing articles, but sometimes it would almost be in code because it wasn't legal. So they'd have to tell you it was an exhibition or this is what happened. And then there have been fights where there was a famous story in Toronto. There was a fighter named Little Arthur King who was a lightweight, and he was doing really well. He won the Commonwealth lightweight title, Canadian lightweight champ. He was a really great African Canadian fighter, and his manager was a guy named Davy Yak. Davy Yak's brother was Baby Yak, who's well known in Canada because he didn't go to the Nazi Olympics. He went to the other Olympics, but had to turn back because of the war. And his best friend was Sammy Lovespring, who became much more famous.
Mm.
And so Davy Yak was his manager, but also a mobster in his own right. So he went down to New York with Arthur King to get him some management so he could get a shot at Ike Williams. And the story he told was he's in the hotel, they're sharing a hotel room, him and Arthur in New York, and they're not there 5 minutes. And he's knocking the door, he goes, just a sec, opens it, and he's greeted with a gun from Blinky Palermo. And Palermo looks at him and says, get out, the fighter belongs to us. And he turned to get his bags, and the guy, no, get out. Forget the bags. And Davy Yak at least said, if you think you're the first guy to point a gun at me today, you're sadly mistaken. And Palermo apparently said, either way, he either get out or die. And so he left. And I got to meet Arthur King in the 80s briefly. And I asked him about working for Palermo. He said, I can't talk about it.
Huh.
And I said, really? I mean, it was that bad. He said, he said, if I'm not being polite, please tell me. And he was super polite. He said, what they did to me, if someone mentions it, I'll just go down there now and get a gun and kill them all. You know, they took everything from me.
Yeah.
And he was rated above Ike Williams by Ring Magazine. They wouldn't let him fight. And he said, of course, Ike was a good friend of mine. He ended up more broke than I did. And he got free because the promoter in Toronto, Frank Tunney, who was related to Gene Tunney, he paid Palermo $500,000 for the rights to release him, Arthur King, from his contract, allow him to come home to Toronto from New York. So what these guys went through, you know, through the mob, and in particular the black fighters went through, the amount of money the mob stole. It's like when people would say to Angelo, you know, was boxing better when the mob used to control it? And he would say, what do you mean used to?
Yeah.
He said they've never left. They're still around. But he said people think it was better for who? Not for Ike Williams, not for Sam Langford, not for Jack Johnson,
Right.
You know, not for hundreds of other black fighters who were the best athletes ever to have lived and ended up with no money at the end of their life.
Yeah. But, you know, despite that, you know, from the end of the book, I mean, Langford, he was very positive. I mean, the
Yes.
guy, he ends up blind and penniless, basically living in a private nursing home. And, you know, his attitude was, he had a couple visitors and he would tell them that, hey, ain't nobody need to feel sorry for old Sam. I had over maybe 600 fights. Got to travel all over the world, see everything there is to see, eat everything there is to eat. He thought he had a great life.
And he did. I mean, he was recognized in his time as the best fighter on earth.
Right.
I mean, how much better can you be at your profession than that?
You know? I guess, you know, you can kind of equate it to Muhammad Ali, right? I mean, right. How he spent the last part of his life with his Parkinson's and the neurologic condition. And he was the most famous man on earth, basically.
And still is. And Thomas Hauser but told me one time, he said, you know, for someone like Muhammad, who just barely passed high school in the 50s, what are his job opportunities? What are his chances? What are Langford's chances without boxing, given the vicious, vile racism of the time? You know, right. He wasn't allowed to go to school.
And yeah, he understood that, I'm sure, just like Ali did.
Yeah. And Hauser said, if you would have said to Ali, here's the deal. You'll get to be the most famous person on the face of the earth ever, but the result is you'll have a neurological disease. He said, of course he would have taken the deal. I mean, who would give up a deal like that? Langford, as you know, because of his father, you know, had to work from a young age. His father used to beat him, and there were so few schools for African Canadians back then. And even though there were few schools, all Canadians, you were expected to work. School was a luxury back then.
Right.
You know, it's not like with our children where, no, you have to go to school. So, I mean, define boxing and then become 2023, and we're still talking about Langford. And thanks to you, they will be forever because you brought him back to life.
Well, I tell you, Lou, before we wrap up, I wanted to make sure that we promote this Canadian broadcasting series that's coming up, because I mean, I'm thrilled that they're going to do this sports episode. They have 8 episodes, one of them is sports related, and they decided that Sam Langford was going to be the feature of that sports episode. So, I mean, that's remarkable. I love the fact that he's going to get that and receive that kind of recognition. And so many folks who don't know about him at all, who watch that episode and that series, will get to learn about him. And hopefully it'll renew interest in him. And there will be more to come.
I'm sure there will. And I'm telling you right now, when CBC airs stuff like that, they get millions and millions and millions of viewers. And there isn't an athlete in the history of this country that would be on it, who you could put on other than Sam Langford.
Yeah, maybe instead of 2 book sales in a month, I get 4 or 5 one month or
I
something.
think you'll get a lot more than that because it has to be made into a movie in our lifetimes. It wouldn't be fair to Sam and to you if it wasn't. His story is so remarkable, and you told it so beautifully. You brought him to life, which is why it was sad for me when the book ended. I didn't want it to end. I still wanted to be with Sam, but the CBC. What are the dates when the CBC?
Well, from what I yeah, again, from what I've heard, I don't have the specific times or anything, but it sounds like the plan is that they will be aired on the 18th and 25th of this month.
Okay, that's
Um,
fantastic.
yeah, if I get more specific information, or as I get it, I'll forward that to you.
Thank you, and I'll promo it every day.
Yeah, and if you hear, let me know. You might hear before I do. I
Yeah,
got to figure out how
absolutely.
I can watch it or pick it up from here in the States.
Um, if you can't, I'll get a copy of it for you because I have friends at the CBC,
Yeah, that'd
and,
be great.
then just send you a copy of it. But it's something that I mean, it'll be played everywhere, and I can't wait. I mean, I wish it was now.
Yeah,
You know, I wish I
yeah.
could sit down with you now in a room with a beer and then turn it on and watch it. I'm sure it's fantastic, and the fact that you're on it, I mean, you're
Well, I, I mean, I was up there and interviewed over 3 hours. Now I don't know
wow.
how. Maybe I don't know if I'll even appear, but yeah, maybe briefly. We'll see.
Yeah, but you speak so well, but also you're the guy when it comes to Sam Langford. There isn't anyone else. It's you, so you have to be the guy. And it's great that the CBC knew that somebody there was smart enough to say, if you're going to do something on Sam Langford, you got to get Clay Moyle because he wrote not a book, he wrote the book on Langford. You know,
Yeah, I was only sorry when I went all the way to Nova Scotia that I didn't have more time to go over to Weymouth and spend some time in Weymouth, where Sam was born and initially raised. That's a missed opportunity. That's a long way to go, and not go that little bit further and make it
right.
to his hometown.
My I've been to Weymouth several times um, when I was doing stand up. You remind me of a story of my father's second honeymoon. He was less than 40 minutes from Independence, Missouri, and his hero was Harry Truman. And Truman was at his library and he didn't go.
Oh,
He said, I got to get home to the kids. This was his second marriage.
yeah, you gotta take those opportunities when they arise. Huh?
He always regretted it because he just adored Truman,
Yeah,
you know.
that's too bad.
Yeah. But have you been in touch with Langford's family at all?
Well, of course, I talked to Carol Doyle, his granddaughter, every once in a while. She was kind enough at the very end of my efforts to write the book to speak with me and provide me with some additional information.
That's
So,
wonderful.
yeah, we touch base periodically, and I try to keep her in the loop of any hopeful information. Uh, I've sent her and her family a few things that I had memorabilia wise related to Sam recently, but yeah, we stay in touch.
That's wonderful. So people can buy the book on Amazon.
Yeah, it's on Amazon. abebooks.com. You might be able to find a copy
Yeah.
there, of course. But yeah, Amazon. I think it's on the Barnes and Noble site. I'm not positive about that, but
I
yeah,
know
you
it's
can find the book.
also listed up here and the chain store here, Chapters Indigo, and it's on their site. So you can go to that site and order it. And I recommend you buy this book for everyone. People always say, well, buy it for your father for Father's Day. Buy it for yourself and know that if you lend it out, you won't get it back. Um, this is such a yeah, I don't want to get emotional, but it's such a wonderful book by a wonderful person. Langford is the greatest fighter, that I mean, he's considered by so many historians, including Clay, to be the greatest boxer that ever lived, title or no title. And there wasn't anyone who ever willingly got into the ring with him. You know, he scared the hell out of everyone. His talent was supreme. He had the timing of a comic. He was a fantastic human being, much like Clay. And I just want to say thank you, Clay, for being here. And I look forward to speaking with you and seeing you again soon.
Yeah, let's do it again soon, Lou. It's been too
Absolutely.
long. Enjoy the time with you.
Yes, next time we'll do Billy Miskey.
All right, I'm up for it.
Okay, thank you so much, buddy.
All right, take care.
You too. Be well.
Thank you.
Okay.